should we have the Young Guns conversation now? Because this is being talked about.
5 years in the making. So this started in 2019, and I approached John Fusco, the original writer of both films, and I said, "Hey, John, here's what I'm thinking." And this was prior to the Mighty Ducks Game Changers thing with Disney and all that. I was like, "What do you think about this?" He said, "I think we should investigate. I think we should start." So I just started doing all the research, staying in touch with John. So what about this? What about this? Great. Can
I just backtrack for a second?
Yeah,
Because I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Your relationship to those two films, like, did you always have like a particular fondness for them? Was this like an itch that you always wanted to scratch? Because we've talked about like you're kind of like wrestling with nostalgia and wrestling with returning to things. The Mighty Ducks was something you kind of like had to be dragged to, kicking and screaming a little bit.
Oh yeah. In both directions, in and out.
We'll get to that if we have time. But why Young Guns? Why did this lure you back that you want to return to this story?
Well, I'm going to say something that'll probably scare you, but playing Billy the Kid, that character is probably the closest I've ever played to anybody who is like me. And not that I'm sociopathic. However, it's probably the most fun I've ever had playing a character. He was so beautifully unhinged.
Yeah.
And from what we know, historically speaking, that is who he was. That he was a prankster, that he was a jokester, that people adored him, but they were also terrified of him because you never knew what direction you were going to get on any given day. And so I just had such an affinity for the character. And over the years, I've become very fond of the desert and the Southwest. And I feel very at home in New Mexico. And again, you raise a really interesting question, and that is, why would you want to go back to something when all you've talked about for the last 20 years is moving forward in this current climate of nostalgia? And if I'm going to get dragged back kicking and screaming, how about I not get dragged
to the stuff you were kind of
kicking or screaming, something that I really enjoyed. Let's figure out a way to reboot this, rediscover it, re-examine it, however you want to frame it. And so I thought, we already teased this idea with Brushy Bill Roberts. I went to Hico, Texas, where Brushy Bill is buried. Spent time in this very small town in central Texas. And there is a compelling argument that he was not killed in Fort Sumner in 1881. There's a very compelling argument that Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid were too good of pals, and Pat let him go. I believe that story. I know there are a lot of historians that cry foul on that, and I'm sure, and that's valid as well. But but I think that this take on history, that he lived to be an old man and died in 1950, after going to the Governor Mabry in Santa Fe, had an audience with the governor and stated his case, and then 3 weeks later he was dead. So he didn't get a lot of time for forensics, certainly the forensics that we have now, and the investigations to get to where we are now. Just so, since we made the movie, they did a side-by-side comparison with a picture of Brushy Bill and a picture of the kid, the only tintype photo that existed of the kid, and they brought in a New York City forensic, one of those guys that does the deep dive on the features. So what do you call that?
No, I got you. Facial recognition.
Facial recognition. Thank you.
Yep.
So this guy said, without knowing what he was looking at,
actually went there.
He said, that's the same guy. He says, well, what percentage? He says, 99%. That's the same guy.
So can you give, your cameras are not up yet, but you do have locations you're starting to scout, I imagine?
We started scouting locations in January. Then we had the LA fires.
Right.
Raced back for that. Then I just went back a couple weeks ago, met with the governor, secured the tax credit, scouted a bunch of Indian pueblos, which are going to suit our purposes for a lot of the shooting. And we just brought on a casting director, wonderful casting director I work with now, and very respected, probably one of the top 3 casting directors in LA, named Mary Vernew.
Right.
Betty May, you know her.
Yep.
She's amazing, and her team's awesome. And so of course, I just got my cast list the night before I arrived here. So tomorrow morning, I'm going to start going through those and start putting together who I think are our candidates.
So back at Young Guns 2, sadly, between those first two films, most everyone was killed off.
That's right. No, that's right.
But Lou has been talking about it.
Right. Lou returns.
Okay.
Christian Slater returns. We didn't see either of them die on camera.
Okay.
We certainly didn't see Billy the Kid die on camera.
Right.
And if you want to continue the narrative of the Brushy Bill story, there's a potential for 3, 4, and 5. Whether I'm in the next installment or not but I already have an idea for what that is, for what 4 is. But
has Bon Jovi been contacted? Is
I'm not allowed to say. That's all I can say.
Would you like to have him contribute in some way?
I'm not allowed to say.
I think you just said something. And with
John has remained a friend,
yeah.
and he's very enthusiastic about being involved with this. Very enthusiastic.
Now, with all due respect, the title, you're a young man still. You're
Right.
young at heart.
Right.
What's it called?
Young Guns 3.
Okay.
Dead or Alive.
Okay.
So it begs the question: is he dead? Is he alive?
Right.
It also tucks into John's song "Wanted Dead or Alive." So there's that little Easter egg. But it does center on a bunch of new regulators, mostly Latino,
Yep.
indigenous people. And it takes place. Most of the film takes place in Mexico.
Yeah.
And it falls on the eve of the Mexican Revolution. So you have a young Pancho Villa who was 28 at the time. You have his group of soldados, true believers and revolutionaries who were all kids.
Yeah.
You had a human trafficking ring going on the border. He was taking kids from the pueblos and consigning them to his army. They were grabbing kids off the orphan train, and there was a whole cabal of people. The Germans were there.
Yeah.
There's so much history that was going on the border, and then of course during the Mexican Revolution, the Germans were funding Pancho Villa. Because the Americans were just they were not interested. They looked down their nose at Mexicanos. So the Germans were providing gold and arms, and they were also spying on America. This was also right a few years before World War I. So all of this is happening south of the border, and Billy the Kid meets Pancho Villa, and he is asked to come along and train his young men. So that's basically the story. So I become the Tunstall character,
right,
in many ways,
yeah,
and bring this group of young, mostly Latino, young men through their paces, and then all hell breaks loose. And so the setup is great.
It sounds
the setup
amazing.
is a lot of fun.
I have a long history of talking to actors about these kind of dream legacy projects like Bill and Ted 3. I feel like I was talking to Alex and Keanu for 10 years.
Right.
So I'm hoping we can push this to the finish line, because clearly there's a passion there, and clearly there's a will, there's a way. It's going to happen.
And it's a big Latino cast.
Yeah.
Big indigenous people cast, without feeling like it's. It feels natural.
Yeah,
It doesn't feel like it's. Oh God, they made the woke version of Young Guns.
Yeah.
This is natural. This is organic to what was happening at the time. And so that's exciting for me.
Well, it's exciting to see you're excited about it. That's the most important thing.
And there's so many great
Yeah.
Hispanic, Latino actors right now. You got Anthony Ramos, and you've got this kid from Reservation Dogs. I think we were talking about that yesterday, DeFaro Winnetay.
Yeah.
And so there's this great pool,
untapped talent.
Guys that are going to be really exciting to see cast in this movie.
All right, I'll be visiting you on sets,
It'd
whether
be
you like
amazing.
it or not.
Please, please, be great.